It is now my pleasure to begin introducing the keynote speaker. For those of you who know me, know that I tend to procrastinate a little bit. Okay, it's a lot. I procrastinate a lot. My first and second year, I found myself learning how to write an essay that was supposed to take 3 weeks in a single night. I wouldn't be surprised if our next speaker was inspired by watching his friends go through similar experiences, as he is a UCSD alumnus and the founder of Ritual Energy. Not only does Ritual Energy help sleepy college students like myself get their all-nighters dose of caffeine in a single sitting, but it also seeks to take a holistic approach to business. As a young entrepreneur, Alex has strived to create a business that considers sustainability in its daily operations. Please welcome Alex Nielsen.
Thanks. Perfect, thank you. Hi everybody, my name's Alex, and like he said, I'm the founder of Ritual Energy. So I could go on a lot. Let's see if this thing's working. Yeah. Clicker? Or, is it on? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. There we go. Cool. I'm a whiz with tech. Anyways, I could go on quite a ways with what Ritual Energy is, but in a nutshell, it's basically a tasty energy snack with a whole cup of coffee in it. So that's the basic idea of it. But for some of you who don't know, Ritual Energy started right here at UC San Diego. I don't want to go too much into the product because what I want to do with you guys today is take you on a bit of a journey into Ritual Energy to see what sort of impact we're trying to make in the food industry and that impact on the planet. So really quickly, to hop into this, a little bit, about me. So I've always loved food ever since a kid. As you can probably see, fan favorite of mine, sauteed Spam at the time. Fast forward 8 years and things have changed quite a bit. So my relationship to food was more of a general appreciation, but over the course of 8 years, heading into my freshman year at UC San Diego, it became a passionate interest. Something I look forward to the details to, the difference between phytomicronutrients and what it does in your body and so on. Anyways, I was getting into triathlon at this time, and a little background about Ritual Energy. I discovered during these races this strange little caffeinated snack. So for those of you who don't know, these are basically like salty sugar cubes for endurance athletes. Like I don't necessarily recommend them, but one thing did stand out to me. There was caffeine in them. It was this nice little convenient pack that had caffeine. So I wasn't much of a caffeine consumer before then, but I started using these during my races. And I'd forgot one of these in my backpack one day. I show up to lecture and I start falling asleep in the front row. Like worst possible thing that could happen. My eyes start closing, my head starts nodding, and I start searching for things in my backpack, anything that could help with this. I find this in my pack, pop a couple, and I am cruising through the rest of the class. And of course, like the rest of the evening as well. But anyways, that was sort of the idea behind Ritual Energy. Is something about the convenience of it as well as the caffeine made it really appealing, but in a way that I wanted to make something that was cleaner in ingredients, something you didn't feel guilty about, something that you could eat on a daily basis without eating basically sugar cubes every day. So as we move forward, as we started to make this a reality, a big piece of this was manufacturing. We had to make it. It was a neat idea, but if we couldn't deliver it to people, it didn't matter. This is actually us starting a commercial kitchen. After we moved from our blender in our kitchen, we started making these things out of a commercial kitchen. Showed up here about 4:30 a.m., got done at around 7 or 8. That's the look on my face. We'd made about 200 bars. So just for reference, today, 200 bars takes us under 3 minutes. So it was one thing to sell and market a product, but to get into the manufacturing was a whole nother piece. As you can see, we've gone through many different generations of product. It took trial and error. It took going through 6, 7, 8 generations of flavors, caffeines, colors, packaging, sizes, delivery methods to figure all of this out. But it was an incredible learning curve. As we continued to grow, we came to this interesting division point. And this will all get to sustainability, trust me. We came to this interesting division point between whether or not we wanted to invest in still manufacturing our own product. And that was a really tough decision. It would take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of resources to do so. A lot of companies, especially small food brands, decide to say no at this point. It's a lot of hassle. They basically contract that out with a co-packer. Someone who makes the product for them, someone who basically you just pay and then, provides product for you, you ship it to your customers. But it was really important for my family and for me to be involved in every step along the way. We're already so distant from our food production as is in America, but to take away the actual creation of the product wasn't something we were ready to do. So we ended up investing in our own food facility, being able to make the things we wanted to make, experiment with different flavors, and we learned a lot in this. But something that I wasn't expecting really stood out to me is as we started scaling up, this is an older photo by the way, but as we started scaling up, we started to notice, like just by being in the factory, by moving around, by producing these products, streams of waste. We could see where they were coming from. We could see what was being wasted. We could see how much, what was causing it. And that gave me a very interesting perspective on this whole thing. What I didn't know before was the amount of packaging waste that goes into food manufacturing. And that even starts before the consumer gets it. Sorry, I know I'm running a little bit over time, but I'll be quick. So what's really interesting, we'll start with packaging. That's a huge focus of ours because it's a huge source of waste in the food industry, and that's what we're trying to accomplish in Ritual Energy, is to combat that. Primary packaging, what you're used to that goes on the outside of the bars, this is not traditionally recyclable. This is a 3-ply material. 3 different materials are laminated together to make this, and you can't throw it in your standard recycle bin. Luckily, there are companies like TerraCycle who do take these, who go through the laborious process, don't ask me how they do it, of splitting this apart into its 3 constituents and recycling the different pieces. So, not a lot of people know this, but when you set up for a production run, just changing over products from one flavor to the next, there's a lot of waste that happens in between there. Setting up the machinery, a lot of packaging goes through that never touches product. And in a traditional factory, that goes straight into a dumpster, straight to the landfill. And that just wasn't acceptable to us. This is virgin product that never touches the actual food, and it's just being thrown away. So these guys cost us about $200 a pop, but for us, it's worth it to keep everything that we produce, and even before it gets to the consumer, out of the landfills. Another little thing that we do, very simple, is we ship and receive a lot of stuff. And in there is bubble wrap. It's really simple, it's really basic, but where it's safe and sanitary to do so, we will keep that in circulation. We'll basically, we haven't bought bubble wrap for 2 years. So, for our retailers, if you're a retailer of ours, we provide you with reusable displays. So these are things that don't get tossed every time it needs a refill. They're displays that can stay there, so minimizing waste on that front. And then they're delivered in these biodegradable plant-based cellulose bags. So when you dump it in, that goes either in your compost or you can toss that. If you're direct consumer for us, packaging is huge because we wanted to create something that you could use again. That the first option wasn't to throw it away. So up here are these little linen bags that you can get. Cotton is naturally biodegradable, but you also, the whole point of this is to keep it out of the landfill. I see people walking around with this around campus with surf wax in them, with essential oils, with hair bands, and you start to see these things places, and it's like, whoa, that circumvented the whole process of becoming waste. But on top of funneling things into the right channel, it's really important for us to create a demand for those things that have been recycled. And so you'll see on a lot of our cards, almost all of our promotional materials made from recycled paper, as well as we're transitioning our cotton materials into recycled cotton as well. The importance about that is creating demand around some of these used materials. As we grow and as we scale, we hope that that demand reaches further. As we want to buy more of these materials, our country and maybe other countries will start to look to recycle more because there is a business in that. There is money to be had in that. And those are some of the innovations that we're bringing at Ritual Energy. But I want to leave you with this one last thought. And it's been a long journey, and if I were to distill this all into one thing, deciding to be our own food manufacturer is not a glamorous direction. It's long hours, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of regulation. But the benefits of that have been incredible. We've been able to see things in production, in manufacturing, that we would have never seen or been able to affect before. So the idea I want to leave you is just, if you find yourself in a difficult situation, don't be so fast to question the validity of that. Because a lot of good things can come from the path that's more difficult. Anyways, that's all I have to say. I'm way over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Now, back before I introduced him, I was talking about how much I like to procrastinate. You may very well be wondering, like my parents probably were, what the heck was he doing with the rest of his time? Well, that has to do with our next guest. I was part of the Student Sustainability Collective. That took up a lot of my time. And 2 years ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to invite our next guest, Barbara Bree, out to a public meeting to hear what she had to say about some of the energy initiatives that were going on at the time. Barbara Bree is a community leader and a high-tech entrepreneur who recognizes the importance of sustainability in her work on the City Council. Please join me in welcoming City Council President Pro Tempore, Barbara Bree.
Thank you very much, Brian. Oh no, do I take this?
You can actually use this.
Oh, I can use this. Well, first of all, it's really fitting that I'm after Alex, since I was an entrepreneur before I joined the City Council. And I loved your story. It exemplifies everything about entrepreneurship: perseverance, relentless spirit, not taking no for an answer, and how you combine being an entrepreneur with sustainability. I mean, it's a great model for, all San Diego companies, and it actually ties in with what I'm going to talk about today. So we're living in very challenging times, and the human race is challenged more than ever before to demonstrate our mastery not over nature, but of ourselves. And these are the words of Rachel Carson. How many of you know who Rachel Carson is? She's really the mother of the modern environmental movement, and she's my environmental shiro. And over half a century later, her words are as relevant as ever. I think we're going to change this slide. It's not changing. So she embodies everything that I value. She was an activist. She was a professional woman scientist. At a time, very few women were scientists. She never got her PhD because she had family members that she had to take care of. She was also a writer. And her most famous work was called Silent Spring, a book written in 1962 on the adverse effects of the pesticide DDT. I still remember growing up, they sprayed DDT in New Jersey, where we would go to vacation in the summer. This was the genesis of the modern environmental movement. So I admire her for her relentless spirit, tenacity, and courage for challenging the status quo. And now I actually have a local environmental hero. So this is Hassan Ikrada. He is the head of an organization called SANDAG. How many of you know what SANDAG is? SANDAG's playing a very important role in our future because it controls all the transportation money for this region. And one of the worst scandals of the last decade was that SANDAG basically lied to us about the amount of money that was going to come in from a tax measure we'd passed many years ago. And Hassan came in about 6 months ago from Los Angeles and basically said the path we were on, which was to build a lot more freeways, was going to doom us, and has essentially blown up the past, and last Friday gave an amazing speech on his new vision for transit in San Diego. Again, he is someone who is challenging the status quo and wants to take our region in a new direction. Climate change is the existential crisis of our time, and we're now challenged to take immediate action to correct our habits and prevent pending climate catastrophe. When it comes to climate change, it's our planet's cities that will suffer the most, particularly in San Diego, where we are very vulnerable to both sea level rise and forest fires. Our cities may be the most vulnerable, but they also provide the greatest opportunities. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our potential to lead in this effort, the accomplishments of which I'm most proud, and what our next steps should be. So San Diego could be a model on how to develop local environmental policies with equity as our guiding principle. Equity in how we create new jobs that benefit all San Diegans, and equity in how we prioritize climate justice. We have two major environmental projects that we are working on right now. One is called Community Choice Energy, which will allow the city to develop as a separate entity its own sort of utility that will get us to 100% renewable energy more quickly. And the second is our Pure Water project. Pure Water used to be called Toilet to Tap. So I've been a part of creating new industries before. I worked at a program called Connect for 10 years, which has helped start many high-tech and biotech companies in San Diego. And I started there in 1986, and at that time I could have counted the number of life science companies on two hands. And as you know, today there are hundreds, and they're industries I never even dreamed of: bioalgae, cybersecurity, genomics. I don't even think I knew those words back then. So I've been on the City Council for almost 2.5 years, and here are the environmental accomplishments that I'm most proud of. Leading efforts to move the city toward community choice energy, supporting the styrofoam ban, being the first elected official to oppose Soccer City, which is the Mission Valley site where our football stadium is. If Soccer City had passed, it would have been an environmental nightmare and traffic nightmare in Mission Valley. There would have been no environmental reviews. My support for Pure Water, and I've been a strong supporter of efforts at Sandag to prioritize public transit. I mean, you all have been ahead of the curve. You all the students at UCSD, as part of your student fees, you get a free transit pass, and I'm sure you're all excited that in the fall of 2021 you'll be able to get downtown very easily on the trolley. So my vision for our city, which is both an economic vision and an environmental vision, come out of my 30 years as an entrepreneur and my long-term support for the arts. So I say it's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, or full steam ahead, and why it's important to bring this to every neighborhood. So the innovation economy, and we're in the heart of the innovation economy here at UCSD, creates the highest paying jobs and good service sector jobs around it. So it's both an economic and environmental imperative for this world to continue to succeed. And I step back and I first look at what our city's competitive advantage is. And it starts with the talent that's already here. And that's you. You're the talent that's here. Second, it's the talent that's going to continue to come out of our educational institutions like UCSD. Third, it's our beautiful natural environment. It's what draws many people here and keeps them here. Fourth, it's our vibrant arts scene. And fifth, it's our relationship with Mexico. The fact that we are on the border, we are a border city, and there's so much more potential in both our business, environmental, and arts community in developing a true binational region. So what leverage does the city have to make sure that we move full steam ahead? First, we have programs in libraries and recreation centers. We have an internship program called Connect to Careers that we can focus more on industries where employers have needs. Employers that do business with the city, every year we give out hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts, can do more to engage with schools and with STEAM organizations. And then we have our real estate. We own City Hall, Golden Hall, and the City Operations Building downtown. Have any of you ever been there? Probably very few of you. It's a dump. My sister has been there. They are all dumps. And it's my vision to develop a technology and an arts hub downtown. And this is really important because only about a fourth of the people who live downtown now actually work downtown. And while most of you either probably live on the campus or near the campus, and you're spared from the daily commute, in the morning, going from the south to the north is horrendous, and vice versa in the afternoon. This is because housing is more affordable in the south, and the good jobs are in the north. So it's both an economic and environmental imperative to move more jobs more good jobs further south, because that will put people closer to where the good jobs are and will cut greenhouse gas emissions and in general make people's lives easier. So transportation is the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in our city. And to tactically implement the strategy of addressing mode shift toward the use of transit and active transportation, we're going to need data. As a businesswoman, I'm very data-driven, and too often our elected officials have made decisions without data. And it's wonderful that Hassan Ikrada has truly started us thinking in a new direction. Appropriate infrastructure is necessary for all of us to feel safe to commute by bikes and other forms of micro-mobility solutions. How many of you have been on a scooter? Of those who've been, how many of you would do it again? So, great. That's only one of many solutions we're going to need in the future. So in this area, we are in the #1 employment center in the entire region. 92,000 people work in this area between UCSD, 3 hospitals, Illumina, and all the companies. And with the trolley coming, we have a major opportunity to get more people onto transit. And then we've been working with MTS and Sandag on trams and other kinds of mobility solutions that will get people from the trolley stop to their place of employment and back again in the afternoon. And what I'm most optimistic about is around all of this, we're going to create new industries and good jobs. And here, Alex, it was perfect that Ritual Energy was first, because I can see that there are going to be many more companies like that starting in San Diego. Probably most of them started by students and alums of UCSD. So community choice energy, pure water, those are our big environmental initiatives coming forward at the City of San Diego. You could say it's sort of our Green New Deal on a local level. And as we're going to do all of this, it's essential that we're going to build housing. Housing for the workplace of today and tomorrow, the right product in the right place. Because we want to make sure that after you graduate, you will be staying in San Diego. And this year, as part of doing this, which again is both an economic and environmental imperative, we will be addressing at the City Council fees that developers pay in lieu of building affordable housing, appropriate density bonuses to build more affordable housing on site, and we will be looking at updating community plans more expeditiously. Actually, the University City Community Plan is in the process of being updated right now. And as I've said, this is one of the most important areas of the city in terms of economic development. But at the end of the day, I believe we have to develop more downtown as both. That is essential for the future of San Diego. So there are many other environmental issues that we're tackling at the city. I think you'll hear more from Serge about one of them. Serge is the mayor of Imperial Beach. We must work alongside state and federal agencies to resolve the Tijuana River crisis and all the sewage that's coming across the border. We have to develop a strategic plan to address our stormwater needs and improve water quality. And no matter what we do, some degree of climate change is inevitable. And so we must prepare a climate resiliency and adaptation plan. And we will probably have to be working with experts at UCSD on this important effort. San Diego has a history of leading on key environmental policies. With the right leadership on key decisions today, we can continue this legacy. A legacy that I hope will one day benefit my children and my grandchildren and future generations to come. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, Barbara Bree, for your amazing work in City Council. Okay, so I am pretty excited for our next speaker, Peter Cronin, who is a quality analyst and green team leader at the Ale Smith Brewing Company. As someone who loves beer and is also an don't worry, I'm legal, and also studies environmental policy, I often wonder how my favorite, I often wonder how my favorite craft breweries fare against one another in their sustainability practices. At AleSmith, Peter looks at the different ways that they can better incorporate more sustainable practices in their brewery. Actually, this year he's going to be opening a Cheese-Smith creamery that uses milk produced from the cows that eat the leftover brewing grain from the fermentation processes of AleSmith's beers. Like, what? So cool, right? So I'm super excited to hear from him. Tonight, he'll be discussing his experiences and the challenges he's faced trying to green the craft brewing industry. Please give it up for Peter Cronin.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. So I was actually invited to do this talk last year, and I actually felt that AleSmith didn't do enough. AleSmith wasn't an organic brewery, it wasn't a sustainable brewery where other breweries are marketed like that. But when they invited me this year, they said, well, if you're having troubles becoming a sustainable brewery, talk about the challenges. So today I'm going to talk about generally what the challenges are in the craft brewing industry. There are 140 craft breweries, over 140 craft breweries in San Diego County alone. It's a huge business here. We have a lot of issues here, water being one of them, that we have to deal with soon. So does anyone, what's wrong with this picture besides my terrible Microsoft Paint skills at the top? This is a brewery about 100 barrels a year, so they do very, very small production compared to AleSmith, which is 40,000 barrels of beer a year. But their main marketing ploy, I had to snap a picture when I passed by this brewery because their marketing ploy of save water, drink beer isn't quite true. So I'm going to talk about why that isn't true and how we can make it better. But first, let's zone in on what's happening with the craft beer scene. So this graph goes all the way back to 1873, where there was about a brewery or two per neighborhood in the United States. We had that little silly blip in the middle in the 20s when beer was illegal, so there were no breweries. And then throughout consolidation up until the 1970s and 1980s, we got to about less than one brewery per state in the US. And then this boom happened. In 1978, Jimmy Carter made home brewing federally legal. So that was one step towards the craft beer revolution. You had people traveling to Europe, having old world styles from Belgium, from Ireland, from Germany, and they wanted to bring those back because they tasted way better than what was on the American market. And then there was generally also a flavor movement going on. This movement, craft beer movement, matches up a lot with, say, the second wave coffee movement, which Starbucks was a major player of. And now let's zoom in the last 15 years or so to what's been going on in craft beer. It's just been crazy. AleSmith, in the 2014, 2015, 2016, we were growing at 20 or 30% per year and trying to keep up. But I really want to hone in on production volume by size of brewery, and that'll lead to some sustainability issues. So at the bottom of the graph in the kind of brownish red is contract brewing. Alex was talking about a lot of producers, manufacturers of food products co-pack out. They'll contract out to someone who already has all the equipment, so they don't have to take that capital expense. Contract brewing was humongous back at the start of craft beer. It's gotten it's slowed down a little bit as the prices of the equipment have gone down. People have now started their own brewery, but it is still around a little bit, and AleSmith actually contract brews for a few people. In yellow, those are brew pubs. So those are breweries, usually around 1,000 barrels or less per year. That terrible Microsoft paint job brew pub is a brew pub. It's in that yellow line. And they have to serve at least 25% of their produced beer on site. That's how you get the brew pub license. They often have a restaurant component as well. In the dark blue are microbreweries. Those are breweries about 15,000 barrels of beer or less per year. 15,000 barrels, a barrel is 31 gallons, so it's about 465,000 gallons of beer or less. And then in light blue, you have regional breweries. This is where you have your Sierra Nevadas, your AleSmiths, your Stones, people who make a ton of beer every year. And you can see that the growth right at the turn of the 2010s was really from regional breweries. And regional breweries are very efficient because they're big. But in the last few years, we've seen our growth and the growth across all regional breweries, it's starting to plateau. And you're getting a lot of growth in microbreweries and in brew pubs. And a friend used this quote the other day, that we're getting back, it's not working again, but we're getting back to where we're getting back to the pre-prohibition style of breweries, where there's a brew pub or a brewery for every neighborhood. Thank you. The next one. So why does the size of the brewery matter? It shouldn't really matter for sustainability. It is cool having a bunch of different breweries. They produce a lot of different flavors. There's a lot of different yeasts. What matters from an efficiency standpoint, there's inherent efficiencies in being a larger brewery or a larger producer. So with this growth in smaller producers, we're seeing big utility issues with water, with natural gas, with electricity. So this is from a sustainability report from the Brewers Association, which is our main trade organization out of Denver, for the whole craft beer industry. And brewers that produce 0 to 1,000 barrels a year have a water to beer ratio of 17.6. So for every gallon of beer that's produced, they use up 17.6 gallons of water. And then you can see as you get larger, from a brewery of 1,000 to 10,000 barrels, so about the microbrewery range, their median is 8.1, and even larger, 5.7 for breweries up to 100,000. Coors released their sustainability report for 2018. I believe across all their facilities in the United States, they're at 4.3, so that seems about the best that you can do. So craft breweries are doing pretty well, even at the 10 to 100,000 barrels per year zone. So that it makes it tough because we're growing, all these small breweries are growing, but they're not sustainable. They're putting a lot of weight on the public utility system. So how do we move towards sustainability? How does the craft beer movement also move towards sustainability? And that is coming from the Brewers Association. They're really helping us out by hiring on a full-time sustainability ambassador. They've started a mentorship program where breweries that are doing better with that ratio can help out breweries that are having a tough time with it. Totally all volunteer work, which is pretty cool. They came out with sustainability manuals last year that tell you how to save electricity, how to save on natural gas, what are the best products to use, what are the best processes to use. There's a bunch of new drought-tolerant hops and barley coming out that I'm super stoked about because they also taste better. And then this is one of the biggest things is this Pentar Hoffman's CO2 recapture equipment is at Sierra Nevada. That left vessel, the yellow vessel that holds all the CO2 coming out of the fermentation tanks, is about the size of a yacht. No brew pub can have that in their system. And CO2 recapture, what it does is it takes the CO2 off of your fermentation, and then you can reuse that later on in the process. Often breweries just let that CO2 go up in the air, and AleSmith does that right now. I looked into getting this system, and our ROI was about 20 years. So there's no way we could get it. But Earthly Labs is coming out with a sweet, smaller version of that. No one has ever made a smaller version for a brewery, probably even under 100,000 barrels a year. So there's all this push to taking big brewery equipment and scaling it down to a smaller brewery. And there's the founder of Earthly Labs with a happy customer. There's also ethanol distillation. There's all these waste streams that still contain alcohol. You put in a ton of energy to create that alcohol. and then it's going to waste. So some ethanol distillers will take that waste and create medical grade ethanol from it. The closest one, we don't have one in San Diego, the closest one is up in LA, and I know a few breweries in San Diego that are sending it up there, but most of them are close by in North County. But if we had one on site or had one close in San Diego, it'd happen a lot more. There's also this great thing of customers moving towards cans. Cans are just so much better for the environment. They're infinitely more recyclable than bottles. They weigh a lot less. So AleSmith, we ship to 26 states, over 10 countries. When that stuff is getting shipped, it weighs a lot less on a pallet if it's in a can rather than in a bottle. There are a few next steps. The main next steps that I'm thinking about are waste streams. So Barbara was talking about Pure Water Project. In a few years, AleSmith's wastewater will go into the Pure Water Project, into Lake Miramar, get recycled, and then become our brewing water again. I'm super excited for that. And we're working with the city, with the Public Utilities Department, to give them a ton of data on our wastewater. It's pretty cool. I'm super stoked. There's also this cool EcoVolt system at Bear Republic. Lagunitas also has one, so two breweries in Northern California have one, where they take their wastewater and they make biogas from it and electricity from bacteria breaking down their wastewater. If you can scale that down, that's another thing I'd love it to just be scaled down, because you can see that's 3 shipping containers. A brew pub can't deal with that. So sometimes we have to lean on our city. We have to lean on our Public Utilities Department to take our wastewater for us and reuse it. There's also this really sweet, this actually went viral, I don't know if any of you saw this video, Saltwater Brewery in Florida. They take their spent grain after the brewing process, they pulverize it, they dry it out and mold it into 6-pack carriers. The owner of Saltwater is an avid surfer and beachgoer, and would just see the 6-pack holder, the plastic 6-pack holders on the beach and in the water far too often. So he spent some money making this process, and those are fully biodegradable and actually can be food as well. They're just plant-based 6-pack holders. So the main waste streams, we have wastewater, but you have spent grain, you have hops, and you have yeast. AleSmith is very lucky. We use Frank Conine Dairy. Frank takes all 3 of those waste streams for us. The spent grain goes to his dairy farm. He takes grain from 15 other breweries in town, and they feed his 880 milking cows. He also has a composting business, San Pasquale Valley Soils. They take our spent yeast and our spent hops that cows can't eat. He adds 50 tons of food scraps that he collects daily to that brewing waste stream, as well as cow manure. And he creates fertilizer for all the small farms in San Diego County, which we have the most small farms of any county in the United States. It's been really sweet working with him. One cool statistic about his farm, every month that Frank Conine's dairy is open and taking these waste streams adds 1 day of lifespan to the Miramar landfill. So, kind of being a little monastic and making one waste stream into another product's raw materials, we've taken Frank's milk and have opened up a creamery on site. So this is our owner, Peter, making cheese. We have about 400 pounds of cheese laid down. Should start selling it at the end of May out of our tasting room. There's nothing that pairs better than beer and cheese. So I'm super excited that we're taking this waste stream. It seems, if you've ever visited a monastic brewery in Belgium, it's exactly what they do. They just keep reusing and reusing and reusing. And with that, thank you, and from everyone at AleSmith, cheers.
Awesome, thank you. If you want to hear more from Peter, he actually teaches the barrel aging course at the UCSD Extension, so sign up for that class, it's super cool. All right, so how many of you have been to the historical beauty that is Chicano Park in Barrio Logan? Awesome, cool. So for those of you who have been to the park, you may already know that it is a place of community healing and historical preservation, as well as one of the very few green spaces for this primarily Chicana area. So I'm gonna click. Cool. It works, thank God. So our next speaker, I'm super excited to introduce, is a Logan Heights, Bahia Logan native herself, and she actually co-founded Chicano Park and the Chicano Park Steering Committee, which is super, super cool. Her name is Josephine Talamantes, or Josie, and she is a pioneer for the historical preservation of Bahia Logan. I'm so excited to learn from her, and I know you all are too, so welcome, Josephine. Yeah.
So these are the questions that I want you to start off with. What does it mean to address internal environmental negligence in underrepresented and marginalized communities while also combating misconceptions and stereotypes about those very same communities? How do we understand and tell our lived and living histories? How do we combat realities of environmental and social racism? So, with that being said, telling you about the history of Logan Heights. So Logan Heights at one time was the oldest neighborhood in San Diego. And Chicano Park was the tipping point, really, that solidified the community, because up until that point, the community was primarily a segregated community and really didn't have access or, how do you say, interactive in the public policy process. I want to just go back historically to talk about Logan Heights itself. And our community was very integrated with multicultural representation. We had a vast array of communities. We had Japanese, Native American, Mexican, Chicano, Euro-Americans that lived in our communities. And we were a self-contained community, and we had all of our own environment that we used for ourselves, as I said, because we were a segregated community. And this picture right here is from, if you've been down to the Cruz or to La Vuelta or to any of the environment there, this is right on the corner of Sampson and Logan Avenue. This is a Rancheria village. So, talking about Logan Heights, I just wanted to kind of show you what it looked like. This piece right here is Logan Heights prior to any of the development and transportation policies that affected our community. This is what it looked like over here, the East End, and this was circa about 1905. This is what it looked like before the Interstate 5 or the Coronado Bay Bridge. This is what it looks like now. What they've done to our community is they separated. Logan Heights, as I said, was the oldest community, and then with the Interstate 5, it basically sliced our community in half through the policy of eminent domain, which uprooted many, many, many communities, individuals. Eminent domain means you can just go in and take somebody's property for the greater good. My friend Jose Gomez always said they basically looked at us as residents, as people who hadn't gotten out of the way of industry, who hadn't gotten out of the way of the new development. So the other thing that really with this process is that they rezoned our community without a public process. The rezoning went from strictly residential to residential and industry, which then allowed for toxic industries to come in right next to elementary schools, homes, and basically was pretty destructive. They were, like he said, they were just waiting for us to get out so they could really make the whole area industrial. It reduced the community by 75%. We went from about 20,000 residents down to about 5,000 residents in less than 14 years. So on April 22nd, 1970, the community, and you all sustainability people know that that's recognized as Earth Day, but that is the founding of Chicano Park, a sacred place in the heart of San Diego, what we call La Tierra Sagrada, sacred land. So why is Chicano Park important to our community? As I said, it marked the change that impacted our community to basically stand up and say, we're not going to take it anymore. We're going to create our own green space. We're going to create a park. Our community had been pretty much attacked, destroyed, and our business leaders and residents started saying, well, how come we don't get the same attention that other communities do? And they started advocating for this park, which the city never paid attention to us, basically fell on deaf ears. So, like I said, we were a self-contained neighborhood with its own businesses, community, entertainment centers, spiritual and religious sites. And Chicano Park basically was the catalyst for change. As the community came out and sustained itself to create its own green space, its own park, people had to start listening. And it really empowered not only us as residents, but it changed the way our interactions with the powers that be at the time. So on these ones, this is what Chicano Park, which is a national landmark, looks like. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but I just want to show you what our park looks like if you have not been there. We are located just southeast of San Diego. We're about 2 miles from downtown San Diego. And we have probably more than 100 murals in this park. And the community sustains this park. We clean our own park most of the time because Parks and Recs really doesn't do it. We host our own events. It's a public park. People can use the park, and they do. But I want to show you what Chicano Park celebration actually looks like as well. This year, which was April 20th, we had probably close to 8,000 people there. This is opening day of Chicano Park. This is Stan Rodriguez. He does a lot of work here with UCSD as well, but he's a Kumeyaay elder, and he did our opening. The Danzantes that are part of our community. Lowriders. The lowriders were very involved early on, and they continue to be. So our park hosted probably more than 350 lowrider cars at the car show. It's probably the largest car show in the nation that isn't specifically for prize and shows, because most of them are now in convention centers. We have children's playgrounds, children's activities, sacred sites. This is the current status. In 2013, after a 5-year democratic process of stakeholders, including the shipbuilders, residents, and churchgoers, we developed a community plan. However, the shipbuilding industry were focused on 9 blocks that we had identified as a buffer zone between the residents and the industry. And they hired consultants to come in, and what the consultants did was basically lie to the community. As they were setting up in front of stores and getting signatures, they were saying that if the plan went through, that it was approved by the city council in 2012, that they would lose the Navy, lose the shipyards, and lose jobs. We took it to the district attorney at the time. She agreed that they lied to the public, but decided she wasn't taking it off the ballot. So then you had the whole city of San Diego voting against the less than 4,000 people that live in our residence, which is unprecedented in community planning and community development. So here are the preservation actions that we've taken for the park. In 2013, the park was listed on the National Register. In 2015, it was approved as a national landmark. The difference between landmark and registry, about 95,000 listed on the registry, about 10,000 listed as landmarks. San Diego has about 17 landmarks. And then on August 7th, Chicano Park Museum was approved a 20-year lease by the city for the building in the park. And there's now also a new planning group that is going forward trying to put us back with a updated plan, because right now we're operating off of a plan from, I don't know what's going on here. You guys okay? We're operating off of a plan from 1979 because it was overturned by the city council. So this is important to us. The history and evolution of the oldest neighborhood of the city of San Diego, told through the designation of a national landmark, will be preserved in perpetuity at the newly formed Chicano Park Museum and Cultural Center, focusing on art, history, and science. Art, because the murals are an outdoor museum. History, because we will tell the history of the neighborhood and the region, because it'll focus on the border area region. And science, because it's important to provide skills for youth coming through for alternative type of employment. We're 6 blocks from the bay, and the bay is polluted. Why can't we start training these kids to do some kind of environmental training to get them, instead of going straight into the shipyards to work, get them to start cleaning up the bay? And we've been working on that. This is what the building looks like right now. This is what we want it to look like. By preserving a history of struggle, we will educate and empower individuals to become agents of change in their own communities. That's our vision. This is a broader vision that we're talking about, talks about our programming. This is what the vision of the park the building looks like from the park. This is what we want it to look like. And there's something missing there. So embedded in this process was a song that was created by Ramon Chunky Sanchez, who was a National Heritage Fellow recipient, that talks about the story. Because we use all aspects of, as Barbara Bree was talking about, of STEM. And you can listen, we use technology, science, engineering, arts, and math in our training. And what's not on there is my little bus. So we've recently entered into a partnership with UCSD, and we now have a mobile bus that will be working, because we actually are not in the building yet, even though we have the lease. And there's what our bus looks like, and it'll be going to the elementary schools in the area. We do not have a high school in Barrio Logan. The closest are the charter schools, but they're quite a bit away. So we figure the bus will allow us to be our traveling museum, our mobile classroom, and we call it our Turning Wheel project. So we're hoping, once we're in there, that we will be able to integrate STEAM into all aspects of the programming that we do, and we will focus on the development further of educating our community and the masses at large, because we now have a whole load of international visitors as well as local, state, and national visitors. So with that, our sustainability is about preserving our culture, our community, and telling the story so that people know that our community is still intact, even though we live in between the industries, and the asthma rate in the community is the highest in the nation in terms of children visiting ER for asthma and breathing conditions. But there we are, and there we'll stay. And like they say, aquí estoy y no me voy. I'm going to stay here, and we're not leaving because you want to move us out. So thank you.
Josephine. Okay, so now at this time we're going to be taking a 15-minute brief intermission. Please help yourself to the free coffee in the back. I know y'all want some, provided by Ecograms and HDH. Also, we have an art exhibition on the topic of climate change that's happening towards the back. And if you see, every corner of the canvases are numbered. Yes, they're numbered, and you can vote for them, so it's a competition. Woo! You could vote for them by writing the number of your favorite canvas on the back of your ticket. You all should have received a ticket when coming in, so then you can write the number on the back and then submit it in the voting box that's also towards the back. The winner will receive about $100 worth of sustainability swag and art supplies, so help them win. It's also your free ticket to free food, and I know you want that. So make sure to vote. Voting ends at the end of intermission, so make sure to go vote before you come back, and I'll see you all in 15 minutes.
Thank you. Is that working again? Okay.
Hopefully it should work.
Okay. So hi, I'm Steve Mayfield. I'm professor of biology here at UC San Diego. Hardcore nerd. Molecular genetics for my entire life. And I've spent about the last 30 years working on algae. When I started out doing that, I wasn't thinking about sustainability. I wasn't thinking about making bioproducts. I'll show you a couple that we make today. I just worked on it because it was a cool genetic system, and that's what I cared about. Okay? But over the last 30 years, the world has changed dramatically. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I think are the dramatic changes. I mean, some of those you obviously see and know about. But I'll tell you what I think are a little bit of the underlying causes. And then I'll tell you how I think algae can make a difference on some of those. Come on. Okay, so what's my talk? It's called Biomanufacturing in Green Algae, Food and Fuel for the 21st Century. But what I'm actually going to tell you about today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about food, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit, not about fuel, but about petroleum replacements, plastics made from algae. Is it thinking? No. Okay. I could show you lots of different graphs that show you what I think is the fundamental, I wouldn't say problem, this is actually a very good thing, but the reason we are where we are today. Who has ever heard of the Green Revolution? Okay, this was started in the 1940s, first by the United States and then taken over by the United Nations, where it just became obvious to many people who were political leaders that the world population was growing and our ability to feed them was falling behind. So we started this first down in Mexico, but then it spread all over the world, and a really fantastic thing happened, which was plant biologists, plant breeders had an enormous success. And over the last 50 years, this happens to be, does my laser pointer work? Maybe? Ah, yeah, it does, kind of. Okay. Over the last 50 years, this is wheat yields in India, but we could overlay anything on this. This could be corn in the United States. This could be rice in China. We had these enormous gains in yield, right? 7-fold increase, 700%, right? This was brought about not by increasing the number of farmers. That's that flat line right there. In fact, if anything, they went down. Not by increasing the land under cultivation, but by industrializing agriculture. We increased the number of tractors, we increased the amount of fertilizer we put on derived from fossil fuel, and we transported that, right? We drove that food all over the planet. This did some wonderful things for us, right? These largely go unappreciated. One of the most amazing things I think is shown in this graph. This is a decline in worldwide poverty over that same period. And although here in the United States, we sort of take this for granted, if you happen to live in China or India, back in 1981, close to 50% of the population lived on less than $1 a day. That is now down to 10% and going down fast. So a fantastic thing, worked really well, all right? These people are gaining wealth. They've electrified their country. They can now afford to eat. There are now 7.5 billion of us on the planet, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because of the internet, all of these people know how we live and they all want to live like us. It looks pretty good. So what has that done? That's caused a significant problem. Okay? And that is that as people get richer, they tend to eat more animal protein, right? Here we are, where's the United States? We're right up here. Our gross domestic product is above $40,000 each, and we eat about 70% of our protein comes from animals. If you're over here on these very poor countries, Indonesia, China's up here someplace, India's over here, you tend to eat less. But that is changing, dramatically changing. What does that mean? That means the world is actually running out of protein, specifically animal protein, and that has enormous consequences on the planet. Okay? One of them is the decline in fish populations, right? We actually had peak fish. This happens to be the North Atlantic fish right here. They peaked in 1975, and they've gone down ever since. And they didn't go down because fishermen got less capable of catching fish, right? They went down because we caught so many of them that we basically put the oceans out of business. And if we continue on this path, here we are today, there will be no fish left in the ocean by 2045. Okay, that's one problem. Here's the second one. The second place we get proteins from is animal proteins, beef, chicken, pork. How do we get proteins into them? We get proteins into them primarily by growing soybeans and then feeding it to those animals. It's a very inefficient conversion process. If you're cows, it's about 4% conversion rate. That means of the soybeans you put into them, only 1/25 of what you put into them ends up as protein on your plate. So what are the consequences of that? The consequences of that are we started to grow soybeans all over the world, and all of these red bars are places where we've cut down grassland or cut down forest to plant those. All right? And this really contributes to climate change. Right? So those are our two big problems. A world population of 7.5 billion people, getting richer, that's a good thing, but as we get richer, we want to consume more things. This is a significant problem. How are we going to deal with that? Come on. I think our batteries are dying up here. Okay, so my version of how we're going to deal with that is we're going to think about how we're going to make food in a completely different fashion. So I work on this little guy, little green algae. Why do I work on this? Because it's the most efficient platform in the world at turning sunlight and CO2 into products. And I'm going to tell you about two of those products. One is food, the second are bioplastics, right? And you can actually measure how efficient these things are. There's a couple of different ways to do this. But one way to do this is to look at simply growth efficiency or biomass yield. So if you're a farmer, you always talk about how many tons per acre did I produce. And if you're a corn farmer, you get up to about 8 tons per acre of corn. Well, that's pretty good. If you grow sugar cane, it grows even better. You can get as high as 25 tons per acre. But our little guy algae, because they've been around for so long, right, 3.5 billion years, the original photosynthetic organisms on this planet, they have evolved to be super efficient. You can easily hit 50 tons per acre. But the real kind of amazing thing about them is in sugarcane, you get to 25 tons per acre, but 21, 22 tons of that are just cellulose, right? But if you look at algae, you can actually hit oil yields per acre of about 2,500 gallons, and you can hit protein yield of about 10,000 pounds per acre because algae, because they're in water, they don't need cellulose, they don't need all those structures, they primarily produce three things. They produce proteins, they produce fat, they produce carbohydrate. So all of those things are food, and many algae are quite edible. And they produce it at a really high rate. Here's soybeans, they get to about 350 pounds per acre. and algae can get you to 10,000. So there's a real opportunity here, but in order to take advantage of that opportunity, well, we have to do a couple things. Next. Get this. All right, so we're going to think about algae as food. So why do we think about this as food? Well, one of the reasons, as I said, because you get a very high protein content, but it also turns out to be really nutritious for you. This is kind of a busy slide, but let me just point out a couple of the highlights. So first of all, algae, and the one I grow specifically, is about 48% protein. Well, soybeans, as I told you, they're the champ out there. They're the one everyone grows in the world. They only hit about 38% protein content. The other thing we think about in protein is what's the amino acid composition. And if you look along here, here's soybeans on top, here's algae below. What you can see is algae have a really nice balanced amino acid composition. That turns out to be really important sometimes. If you grow corn, corn is really low in lysine, algae is really high in lysine. All right? Methionine is another one up here. Lots of organisms tend to be really low in that. Our little algae is really good for that. So what does that mean? That means that it's simply healthy protein, very digestible, that we're producing. It also happens to make some of the omega-3s and omega-6 fatty acids. All right? So everyone knows this is really good. So we set about to see, well, at least by chemical composition, it looks really good. Why don't we actually test this in human beings? So we actually set up a year ago a trial here. We took volunteers, lots of students, lots of faculty and staff here who showed up, and we gave them algae to eat in their diet, either 1 gram or 3 grams per day. So we just supplemented their diet. We ate it every day for 30 days. And during that time, we asked a couple of different questions. We asked one, what does it taste like? Does it help your gut? Right? Does it help your digestive system? And the reason we asked them that is because before we could feed this to people, we had to feed this to mice and to rats and to pigs and to do all those animal testing. And while we were doing all those mice and rats and pigs told us this was doing really good things for their digestive system. Now, they didn't really tell us that like get up and say it. What instead they did was they got way less diarrhea and they got way less gut inflammation, and we could measure that and we could see in it. So we simply asked people, how does this do? And it turned out it worked really well, right? I ate it. I ate 3 grams every day for 30 days, and I can tell you that my intestinal function was wonderful, right? The group that really targeted it, though, were people with irritable bowel syndrome. So we had about 18 of the 60 people who participated that had IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, right? 9 of those had something called IBS diarrhea, which means your inflammation in your gut is so severe that it caused you to have diarrhea. All 9 of them lost that. And so this is a product, and we're going to put it on the market pretty soon. Now, that's a long-term proposition, right? That is something to get food and to change the world, to get people to accept this and to eat it. That's going to take a very long time, okay? But as I said, algae like to produce 2 things. They like to produce protein, so now we've got to track down for that. And the other thing they like to produce is oil. Now, we have been funded by the Department of Energy for years to see if we could take oil from algae and turn it into fuel, and we did that. We made gasoline, we made diesel, we made all kinds of fuels from it. It worked really well. We drove cars on it, we flew airplanes on it. But that always seemed a waste to me. It always seemed like, why are we spending all of this time growing our algae, producing this wonderful oil, and then burning it in an engine? That just didn't make sense. So we challenged the students about 5 years ago and said, hey, we've got all this wonderful oil. We know what we're going to do with our protein. Now we've got all this wonderful oil. We're not going to waste it by burning in a car. What are we going to do with it? And some very clever students came back right away and they said, we should make plastic with it. We should make polymers with it because we will have sustainable polymers. Why is that a problem? All of you know this, but here's just some amazing numbers. 18 billion pounds of plastic end up in the ocean every year. 17 trillion pounds of plastic have been created on this planet and are sitting somewhere in landfills. That is 2,500 pounds for every person on this planet of plastic is sitting someplace. And we said, oh, we have to change that. So we started to look around. What are the plastics that we could make, right? And we looked at them. Are they biodegradable? No, all of the big ones are not. But it turned out one really important set of them, which are called polyester polyurethanes, are biodegradable. So we said, oh, those are the ones we should target. And sure enough, we started to make foams out of these things, eventually worked our way up till we have foams that now meet specification for Adidas running shoes or Reef flip-flops. And the most amazing thing about those foams is I took one of those foams, and theoretically it should be biodegradable. I took it home, threw it in my compost pile for 10 days, pulled it out and put it in an incubator for a few days and took a picture of it. That is 14 days. That is the foam untreated. That is the foam after 14 days in a compost pile. These things are perfectly biodegradable. So we now have polyester, polyurethane foams that we have turned into we've made a lot of things with them. But the coolest thing we made with them is flip-flops, and there's 2 pairs of them floating around here someplace that you guys can look at. Because once we can get biodegradable plastics, now if they happen to end up in the ocean, if they happen to end up in a landfill, these things will completely biodegrade. And we've actually sent this out now to labs to certify it, and they lose about 3.5% of their biomass per month. What does that mean? That means that that pair of shoes will biodegrade completely in about 24 months. And how long does a pair of flip-flops last? About 24 months. So we've now got a plastic that is biodegradable, where the plastic has a lifespan that's proportional to the lifespan of the product that you're wearing, which is a shoe. And I was going to grab them and bring them up here, but you can see them. They'll be back to the table back there. So I'll leave it at that and just say that if you have a problem, give me one more slide here. If you have a problem, I think we have an algae solution for it. In the long term, that is going to be food. I think that is a game changer for the planet. If we can make synthetic textured protein from algae and replace beef and replace chicken on this planet, we've got a chance for all 7.5 billion of us to live a pretty good life. That's our long-term plan. Our short-term plan is to make flip-flops, because we can have these things on the market at the end of this year. I think it's super important for the environment as well, and I think they're pretty cool, and I welcome you to come and take a look at it. And thanks. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so our next speaker is Ellie Brown, who is the director of the San Diego Food System Alliance. For those of you who do not know, the Alliance works to maintain and develop a healthy, equitable, and sustainable food system for San Diego County. The Alliance also consists of about 120 organizations and groups that come together to discuss the challenges, intersections, and opportunities to improving the food landscape in San Diego. Ellie is also a first-generation Japanese American, for first-gen Asian pride, and she brings her knowledge as a multinational resident to her work at the Alliance. Please welcome Ellie Brown.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm in a room full of friends. I'm hearing so much about food today. It's pretty exciting. Very, very complimentary to the previous presentation. I'm really here to talk about food, but really why we need to bring the village back when it comes to food, and looking at food as really a problem of this society. Our network, San Diego Food System Alliance, is a group of over 150 organizations working collaboratively here in San Diego to improve the food landscape in San Diego. But looking at the idea of sustainability and equity when it comes to food. So I was so excited to see the presentation on environmental justice earlier today. You know, every time you buy a cup of coffee at this trendy hipster coffee shop, you're really creating a cascading effect of a highly complex web of relationships, from production, distribution, access, as well as disposal of food. And according to a report by the UN, between 25 to 50% of the global greenhouse gases that's produced in the atmosphere is due to the food system, from the way it is produced, from the way it is distributed, from the way it is accessed, to the way it's disposed of. And in San Diego, most of the product that we consume is imported from all the way around the world. And 40% of the food that's produced in the US is disposed of in landfill, straight into landfill, causing methane, which is 25 times more powerful as a pollutant, than carbon. Than contributing to climate change. So really, we are a very highly efficient system, but very inefficient at the same time. Our food system is truly built on capitalism, and there's absolutely no incentive for companies to not allow you to waste. So what we're trying to do is really encourage a more sustainable and equitable food system where this valuable resource can be accessed by our community. So how do we become so disconnected? How do we get so caught up in this unsustainable food system that we have today? Really, the US was not always this way. There was a time when communities looked like this, where it was little villages, self-sufficient, and the region's food supply and family farms could feed themselves. Similar to how many countries, small countries and indigenous populations that has not been tainted by colonialization organize themselves. But at the time of World War I, American farmers started producing in masses, started producing so that they could feed the whole world. When other countries were in war, and a lot of the folks that were already producing food in those countries were not able to produce the food. And we never stopped. We just kept producing and producing and producing. So the Farm Bill, catalyzed by the New Deal, and now you're seeing the Green New Deal, but the original New Deal catalyzed the Farm Bill, subsidizing commodity crops, corn and soy, which meant that our country started placing a higher value for mass-produced products than real fresh food that's available in the village. Over time, we lost that village, and the food system became industrialized, where power became concentrated by major corporations and out of the hands of small farmers, workers, and the people. And the food that's produced by this industrial system really is not only bad for the planet, but it's also causing chronic diseases. The idea that now we need to promote actively really is the idea of food sovereignty. And this is a group called Project New Village in Southeast San Diego. Belinda over there is an active participant of Project New Village. And I show you them because I believe they really represent the idea of food sovereignty. The right of people to healthy, culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agricultural systems. That's the definition of food sovereignty. To shift the system, we really need to bring the village back. And we need to tackle it from both the idea of demand and both the idea of supply. On the demand side, what's needed here locally is to drive demand towards local, zero waste, less carbon intense food options, plant forward menu items, which also happen to be better for us as well as the planet. With a true cost system that accounts for the negative externalities in the system, from the environmental degradation to the mistreatment of workers and animals. Some of the solutions include consumer education campaigns, institutional procurement, where we're saying the largest public institutions, they must spend the dollars of taxpayers for investing in a better food system. And this is an example of our Regional Food Waste Initiative project, where we're working with the 14 of the largest public institutions to get them to reduce food waste and to donate edible food for hungry people. And they're installing a food waste tracking system in their kitchens for this. In terms of the supply side, we really need to encourage production, processing, and distribution practices that truly build a more sustainable and resilient system. And this is a farm in San Diego called the Solidarity Farm. It's a worker-owned cooperative farm. And really, ag plays a truly important role in this region. Peter mentioned, believe it or not, San Diego is an ag region. We have 5,000 farms, small farms and organic farms. We have more small farms and organic farms than any other county in the nation. So there's tremendous opportunity here, but really, really challenging for farmers to survive economically as a small farmer in San Diego. And we're continuously losing farmland in San Diego due to land prices as well as water prices. So in the last 2 years, we've been looking deeply at San Diego's ag sector and the role of addressing climate change. in the concept of what's called carbon farming. And we've launched a carbon farming task force in partnership with the Farm Bureau this January and convened 40 multi-sector stakeholders to really figure out how can we scale out the idea of carbon farming in this region. Carbon farming is a powerful idea. It's a set of practices carried out by farmers and ranchers to build soil carbon that will not only mitigate, but also sequester carbon, and also provide a number of co-benefits, preventing erosion, improving soil fertility, and water retention. For example, just looking at 2 of the 30-something carbon farming practices, riparian restoration and compost application, if 25% of the riparian areas in the unincorporated county of San Diego are restored, and all of the county's greenways, talking about spent grain, were compost and applied to crop and rangelands in San Diego County, feasibility aside, feasibility and cost aside, these 2 practices can result in emission reduction goals of around 25% of County of San Diego's emission reduction goals. So investing in farmers can result in 25% of the emission reduction goals. So imagine if we can pay farmers and ranchers for not only being active participants in our food system, but for the ecological services that they can provide. We can then imagine a world where we truly have a resilient local food system, where food producers are being taken care of for the land managers that they are. So what does it take to really scale out system level strategies and bring the village back and improve our local food system? Well, first, what we're leading an effort on, it takes committed public and private sector leaders to step up and have a cohesive regional strategy and a desire to roll up their sleeves and continue to innovate and continue to learn from each other. But what's also exciting is that every one of you here in this room, particularly those that are students today, can impact the next generation. You are, as consumers, vote with your forks 3 times a day. So what I want to ask you is, for the next decade, try to think about the impact that you have on the larger system when you're voting with your forks 3 times a day. Set aside convenience, set aside the Amazon Prime for now, and really get to know your farmers, get to know your fishermen, grow your own food, and really build healthier soils, because the planet needs it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Now, marine biology and ecology fascinate me to know, and I'm a marine biology major. And it won't surprise you to know that marine conservation has always been a cause close to my heart. In all of the marine biology courses I've taken here at UCSD, we've always had at least one part of the course dedicated to learning about the human impacts on everything from whales to zooplankton. We've also dedicated time to learning about the strategies being used to mitigate those impacts. And our next guest, Serge Dodina, has been championing those efforts as the founder of Wild Coast, as well as the mayor of Imperial Beach. Serge Dodina, everybody.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Mayfield, we're going to ban a lot of single-use plastic on Wednesday night at the Imperial Beach City Council meeting, so I'm really excited. And then I've been evangelizing about carbon farming with some folks who don't actually believe in climate change on the County Board of Supervisors, because I think it's a good way of building support for ways to address climate change, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about sea level rise and blue carbon, and really talk about some specific things in the world of natural climate solutions that Wild Coast, the organization that I co-founded in 2000, is working on. And our mission, our team of 20 with offices in 2 countries, programs in 3 countries, the United States, Mexico, and Cuba, to conserve coastal and marine ecosystems and wildlife. So what does that mean? It means conserving some of the most beautiful, breathtaking, biologically diverse, and important coastal and marine areas on the planet, and the animals and wildlife that live there, including our amazing marine protected areas off of La Jolla. on UCSD, which happened, we now know the Southern California coast and the coast of California is one of the ocean hotspots on the planet. Who here has been with the leopard sharks in La Jolla? Oh, please, can you all go, like now, and go swim with the leopard sharks? It's one of the world's most amazing experiences you can have, literally steps from the beach, and you have it here in La Jolla available to you at UCSD. And really, it's about preserving these amazing ecosystems that things like fish, or fish spawn and marine mammals, whale sharks, and because of rising sea temperatures, we've actually had whale sharks off La Jolla. Last summer, we had 80-degree temperatures in La Jolla, okay? And of course, our amazing California gray whale that migrates from Alaska down to Baja California. So doing all kinds of things like establishing marine protected areas. We actually own 45 miles of coastline in Baja California. We help set up and manage national parks in Mexico, United States, and Cuba. And then help programs to actually conserve wildlife. But the most important part of that is to work with and for people. To make sure that we can all enjoy the ocean, to make sure that you can enjoy continue eating sustainable seafood, and to make sure that in places like Magdalena Bay, where you see mangroves in the back where we're working, and we help set up a giant national park, that fishermen and their families can continue to make a living harvesting things in a sustainable way. They're not kicked off their land, they're not kicked out of the water, they're encouraged to continue working. But even here in San Diego, there are so many kids that have never actually been to the beach. Literally, never been to the beach. It's really important to make sure that everybody in San Diego County, every single kid, every single kid and family in California has unfettered access to our coast. That there are no fences, there are no signs, there are no mean people that say that they can't go there, because the coast belongs to us. The ocean belongs to us. And when I started Wild Coast in 2000, and I'm going to have a problem with this clicker again. Can someone please help me out here? So there we go. When I started Wild Coast in 2000, we were interested in biological diversity and saving the world's most amazing places and wildlife. We weren't worried about climate change. It was something we were cognizant of, but we didn't know that we weren't worrying about sea level rise. And now we realize that obviously the game changer for all of us and for natural ecosystems is sea level rise and climate change. But what we also realize is that helping preserve natural ecosystems as well as carbon farming and doing all kinds of other things within nature can help adapt to and then mitigate climate change and sea level, especially sea level rise. We've seen what's happening across the globe with increasing storms. This is Hurricane Patricio. This was one of the most intense second most intense tropical cyclones in the world's history. The most intense tropical cyclone in the West ever. Winds over 200 miles an hour, formed right off the coast, hit the state of Jalisco in Mexico really quickly. And last year I was in the area that it hit. This was a few years ago. Luckily it hit an area that was fairly uninhabited. That's a large national park. You still see all the trees that were flattened, but because it hit an area that was largely undeveloped and natural, it had less of an impact. And so what we realized with these increasing storms and sea level rise, one of the most important things we can do to mitigate the impact, or to adapt to and then mitigate the impact of sea level rise, is to actually make sure that we conserve these natural ecosystems. This is Cabo Pulmo, a national park or marine protected area in southern Baja, the northernmost coral reef in North America, where we actually helped conserve the coastline. And it's important because thanks to scientists here at Scripps, we know that because it was established as a marine protected area, the fish came back over 460%. It's like Jurassic Park of the ocean. So it's really important to continue figuring out ways to conserve these areas so that when storms hit, we have storm surge, or that developers want to put golf courses or mines or marinas along the coast, we have a way and tools to actually make sure that those projects aren't put in areas where sea levels are going to rise and the coast is going to have some impacts. And so what we developed is a methodology in Mexico to actually, first and foremost, preserve 60 feet above the mean high tide line, or what's called the federal maritime zone. This is really annoying. There we go. Okay. And so we started applying this all over Mexico, including in southern Oaxaca. In southern Mexico, we work. This is a coastline, a 16-mile beach where last year 1.3 million olive ridley sea turtles nested. And so this beach has been under threat from development, but because we applied these conservation concessions and protected the shoreline in partnership with the National Park Service, we can make sure that these sea turtles have a place to nest and for a while. And so we started applying these tools, and so far we've done 1,200 miles of coastline of Mexico's Pacific coast through conservation concessions. That's 1,200 miles of some of the world's most biologically important and wildlife-filled coastal areas that won't be impacted by human development, that will absorb sea level rise, will absorb storm surge, and will help buffer against some of these major storms and hurricanes that are happening. So that was phase one, pretty cool. We started doing that before we were really, again, cognizant of the impact of accelerating climate change, but more importantly, the power of natural ecosystems to sequester carbon. And so what we started looking at, and so what we, for example, this is in Magdalena Bay, about 2/3 of the way down the Baja coast. We preserved all of the shoreline on these islands, 5 barrier islands. We preserved all of the shoreline, set aside the islands as a national park in partnership with the National Park Service of Mexico, but realized that the key to adapting, to mitigating climate, to sequestering carbon, because studies were coming out of places like Scripps and UC Riverside and other institutions talking about how much carbon was being sequestered by mangroves. These are the rainforests of the sea. And so we started developing a methodology with Mexico's National Park Service to actually start figuring out how to conserve these aquatic islands. And mangroves are extremely important in fisheries production. 2/3 of the fisheries productions of southern Baja is in Magdalena Bay and mangroves. And so very, very important to conserve these areas, not only for their ability to sequester carbon, but for their ability to, but to even help provide ecosystem services like fish. And so to date, we've helped conserve about 41,000 acres of mangroves through conservation concessions, very new process in Mexico, and very actually unique worldwide. And then we started realizing that we needed to start quantifying the amount of carbon that was being sequestered by these ecosystems. We partnered with 2 scientists, Catherine Lovelock from the University of Queensland in Australia, and Fernanda Dame, a Mexican scientist who got a job in Griffith University in Australia, who were experts on this, and really wanted to come out and start studying how much carbon these ecosystems were sequestering in a process what we call blue carbon, right? That's the carbon that's being sequestered by marine ecosystems. And so we sent out a team of our US, Mexican, and Australian scientists to start taking carbon samples, which we're doing now. And what we found was pretty amazing. 140 to 180 tons per hectare of organic carbon is stored mainly in the soil. We think these are some of the most carbon sequestering ecosystems on planet Earth. And big article in Science that came out, and the recognition, just like with carbon farming, of how important conserving ecosystems like mangroves, tropical rainforests, salt marshes, all these natural ecosystems are to help us figure out how to mitigate the impact of climate change, how to adapt to climate change, but also how to mitigate it. And so this plays a very big role in the Paris Climate Treaty in the area of land use and land use change, or what they call LULAC. And Mexico realizes that conserving these mangroves and other natural ecosystems will play a significant role in helping them meet their Paris treaty agreements, which, unlike our own country, they take really seriously. It's really gratifying to work in Mexico, in a country where the president believes in science and in climate change. So it's actually really nice to go south to really get to deal with world-class scientists and a government that believes in science, unlike our increasingly third world or undeveloping country. Anyway, and it's been, the important thing here is for someone who's interested in conservation and preserving these ecosystems that are important for people, It's not always like the case of Barrio Logan where governments appreciate local communities or their native ecosystems, their green spaces or blue spaces. Because traditionally they were spaces that were ripe for being cut down by shrimp farms, for mining companies, for resort development. And all of a sudden people realize that, hey, these have global significance, these local ecosystems that support fishing communities like there in Baja California. And more importantly, we can put these systems on the global market and sell carbon credits under a whole process that's been verified, and that money can go back into funding conservation activities, but also more importantly, local community activities. They can fund a school. They can fund a health clinic. They can show that conservation and preserving our natural environment can have a positive impact on the community. They can benefit the community. That's that natural bank that can fund the community, right? So that's something that's really important because generally the only other people offering free money are resort developers, shrimp farmers, and people who want to cut down the natural ecosystems. And the second phase of this process, we just got a grant from the United Nations, is to start growing, working with local communities of Baja to not only protecting the existing mangroves, but to start growing more mangroves, to sequester more carbon, and then to also, again, continue to adapt to climate change. I'm going to end here talking about Imperial Beach a little bit, and I'm going to show a little video because we're almost out of time. Can we get the next slide of the video? Can you play the video? So this is Imperial Beach during what's called king tides, and there's supposed to be sound to it, but apparently there isn't. And there we go. This is from Vice News. It just came out, filmed in January.
This is house right now. Sean Gould has lived in Imperial Beach, California for a little over a year. He's already gotten used to the scene. That's because it's caused by something called a king tide. These extreme high tides are natural. They happen once or twice a year because of a specific alignment of the sun, the earth, and moon. But they're getting worse, forcing residents to confront, or in some cases completely ignore, a problem that will soon be widespread.
So, Imperial Beach surrounded on 3 sides by water. We preserved every inch of open space in the community, and now that video wasn't taken 6 years ago, it was taken a few months ago. It was taken in January, king tides, end of January. That's happening at La Jolla Shores. It's happening all over the world, right? And so what we've realized is, I grew up helping save every inch of blue and green space in Imperial Beach. That's our salvation. The only reason we're going to be able to adapt to sea level rise, which by the way will impact 30 to 40% of our community, is our capacity to continue to work with nature and not against it. But we'll have to make some tough decisions. But one of the things that we've been evangelizing about is Imperial Beach, frankly, doesn't have any money. It's not La Jolla. We're the lowest income coastal community in San Diego County, if not Southern California, or coastal city. We should be doing carbon credits for our own wetlands. The fact that our residents should be getting an economic benefit from having preserved nature. And that's something we're evangelizing about up and down California. I was in a National Adaptation Forum last week in Wisconsin. And we need just like we need to work with our carbon farmers, we need to make sure that in communities like in Barrio Logan, why shouldn't the Port of San Diego starts planting more seagrass beds? Those revenues should benefit Barrio Logan, National City, Chula Vista, Imperial Beach, so that people see the benefit of not only preserving nature, but restoring it. Help our communities become more resilient and even wealthier with nature. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, George. Can we get a round of applause for all of our wonderful speakers?
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to be having a brief question and answer sessions with our speakers. So if I can invite y'all back up to the stage. And if you have a question, feel free to line up at the microphone right here. Don't be shy. All questions are good questions. So come up. And once again, our speakers are up here. Barbara Bree unfortunately could not make it to this segment of the event because she had to go somewhere. But Yes, we have Dr. Serge Dedina, Alex Nielsen, Stephen Mayfield, Ellie Brown, and Peter Cronin. Oh, and Josephine Talamantes, sorry. Josephine, sorry. Or Josie.
Hello everyone, my name is Will. My question is addressed to Dr. Mayfield. I know that your company, Sapphire Energy, in the past has worked with companies like Monsanto who are kind of the antithesis of sustainability, and we're here at Green Talks. So how do you reconcile Monsanto and your work here at UCSD?
So the program that, fine. So the program we had with Monsanto was actually to use algae as a forward genetic screen to see if they could identify genes that would improve agriculture. Agriculture powers the world, right? There are 7.5 billion people on the planet, and if we didn't have industrial agriculture, we would lose 3 billion of those people very quickly. So, although we can plan for and attempt to make the world a better place, and I spend most of my time doing that, we also have to deal in the present realities of feeding 7.5 billion people, and Monsanto is a very big part of that, as all industrial agriculture is. So you and I have the benefit of having the financial resources that we can think about sustainable foods that probably cost a lot more now, but many people on the planet can't. They're, I wouldn't say forced, but their opportunity to live is to eat food that comes from industrial agriculture. So it's going to be here for a while until we find a better system to supplant it. So I work on trying to find a better system to supplant it, but I can't burn down what's here now, or I would be putting a lot of people with less resources than me in harm's way.
Thank you.
Hello, this is for Stephen Mayfield again. I don't know, what's the farming process? I was wondering if nanoplastics are going to be affecting, if you're making supplements and with algae. I know Jenny Brandon had mentioned one of her, I think, papers that's about to be peer reviewed is talking about the nanoplastics are a much bigger problem than people anticipated. So besides microplastics, nanoplastics being smaller. So I'm wondering when there's supplements, and if even though it might make you healthier immediately, if it ends up building up toxicity at some point.
Yeah, so that's a tough question to answer because that data is just sort of being generated now. It's quite clear that if we're going to put 17 billion pounds of plastic into the ocean every year that does not biodegrade, it still physically degrades, right? It gets beat up by waves, by wind, by abrasion. And so what does that do? That puts microplastics into the ocean. And eventually what happens is they actually act as a substrate for algae to grow on them, and then the fish mistake them as food and eat them, and so they get into the fish, and then from the fish get into us. So this is a problem. The simplistic solution is stop all plastics right now. But we won't do that, and we won't do that because half of the things that we're wearing and half of the things in this room are made out of plastic, right? Because they're convenient, they're cheap, and we buy them. So, the only way we get around that is to come up with better alternatives, right? And it takes a while to get there. Like today, many of you probably don't know this, but today, renewable energy surpassed coal in being for electricity generation. So that was completely non-existent. Right, that was completely non-existent 10 years ago, but we started down that path and it took a while and we got there. So microplastics are an enormous problem. They're definitely in our food chain. We are eating them now, and that is going to get worse if we don't do something about it. So I cannot tell you what a solution to that is other than we have to change our ways. All of us.
Is that something you're checking in the supplements then?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There is no good way to measure that right now. There are no assays that people have come up with that I can either look at my algae or look at the fish or look at anything in the food chain and know whether those are there or not, primarily because we didn't really anticipate that those were a problem a few years ago. So as people build those assays, we will look at that. Specifically, there's nothing inherent in algae that it takes up microplastics. As I said, the fish take it up not because they perceive it as food, but simply because it acts as a platform for algae to grow on, and then they're trying to eat the algae that's on top of it. So it's not that algae take it up per se and get it into the food system. It comes about in a different way.
I was just going to say on the plastic issue, one of the reasons, cities like Imperial Beach and, San Diego banned styrofoam is because we want the industry to work with scientists like Dr. Mayfield, and we don't want it's killing us, right? And so I think to us, I think industry is watching this and saying, okay, we need to find more solutions like this, because you're going to see more cities and more countries completely banning plastic. It's completely out of control. Pay attention to what you see on the roadways and the freeways. It's unbelievably horrible. There's garbage everywhere. Never seen anything like it. We should all be ashamed.
This question is for Josephine. So I guess how as we community members can support Barrio Logan and Chicano Park, both from the policy side and especially regarding sustainability. I work at a policy school, and then we work closely with Heritage kind of food justice for slow food. So we always ask ourselves kind of that question when we're debating events to hold or how we can best support the community, especially the Kumeyaay people as well.
The first thing that comes to mind is we have a herb garden in the park that we're cultivating and developing. It's a small portion of the park, but there's a number of people that are planting and reusing those herbs for good reason. With regard to policy, I'd go back to our museum, because our museum will incorporate all of that, and we will be working closely with the city and the county with regard to sustainability of our services, and then how we educate our children and the next generation. So I would stay close to anything that's happening in the city, just like IB. I believe San Diego has recently banned all styrofoam and those types of things, and we're supporting those efforts. But we also, like I said, focus on the next generation, because those of us that are at my age are, kind of giving guidance, but it's really the next generation that's taking it. I don't know if that completely answers your question, but that's where we're at.
I want to address the Imperial Beach concept. It's something I totally support, and in terms of we have a lot of wetlands in San Diego County, and I was thinking of the one that's called Paquitos. It's by Carlsbad. But my main complaint is, as I've shared with Josie, is that supposedly in Sacramento, San Diego County is like the avant-garde, greatest thing since the light bulb regarding climate change. But your voices are like little silos over here, and here you have an opportunity with a new governor where you're impassioned. I mean, it makes sense. I think he could be accessed, but you need to get some visibility collectively and perhaps get some media coverage in Sacramento because this is the opportunity. And relative to what you were talking about, there's some statutes in the books that could accelerate taking care of some of that wasteful food. I know because I helped modify and amend some of those laws. And they're taking advantage of SBAs. It's like we still have so many silos. California is so powerful. It's like you want to scream. You have all the resources, and all you have to do is start coordinating and maybe sharing a little bit. I have relatives that are ahead of the game in terms of flying in and lecturing the scripts relative to what you've been saying. But I'm sitting here at night and when you think And I'm thinking to myself, why doesn't all of California, why don't all the UC systems talk to each other? Because if you're as serious and as passionate and intellectually smart as you are, then you ought to take the bull by the horn, and I leave it up to the youth to do it, because we can do it. The resources are here and the examples are here. Like what you suggested regarding Bonnie Logan, the Port Commission. We should be doing something for the foot of Crosby. That's the old Seth R. Chavez Parkway, because we have the sea. You know, we should be teaching the kids about the algae. But we've got to start talking to each other and taking some risk. And there's no excuse for not having any farm to fork exhibits going on. So the city councilwoman that asked me to help out on sending the information, that ain't my job. I'm going to be 81. I fought the good fight, you know? So it's, the youth here should be asking for accountability from their representatives and not talking in a vacuum or in silos. The power and the money is in California. I'm a retired legislative analyst, and I set national precedent before I ever got that position. So
Can I
excuse.
Can I make a comment on maybe an answer to your question? I think part of the reason is because, at least when I grew up, and I'm certain this is true for many other scientists, we were told that our job was to discover truth, but not necessarily to advertise it. In fact, for much of my career, I was told that my job was to work in the lab and discover great things, but not to go out and necessarily tell people about that. And I think that has changed over the last couple of years. I think that we began to realize that as scientists, it doesn't really do us that much good to have great knowledge if we don't share it with everyone else on the planet.
Well, it comes across narcissistic and, you know, which is something I can't extol. And that's excusing. That's like maybe the first Mexican American working anywhere as a supervisor in San Diego County. That's how old I am.
Yeah.
But that didn't keep me from advocating for change. I mean, it's an excuse. It makes you intellectually lazy. That's the way I see it. But I'm sorry, that's part of my heritage, and that's part of the genes in my family. That's stupid.
Well, first, thanks to your comments. In terms of the whole natural climate solutions, maybe you can address the carbon farming. I think the United States, especially California, are way behind on this issue. And so, you know, the way we've been evangelizing about natural climate solutions, and that's just this. We need to protect and restore every inch of blue and green space we have. You know, and that's this issue of density of housing and new affordable housing. Do we want more housing in the backcountry, in open space, or to take over farmland? Or do you want to create denser, more affordable cities, and actually more sustainable cities? So that's what we've been evangelizing, and we'll have one of the first, at San Diego, we're going to have a workshop on blue carbon, the first one in San Diego. We held the first blue carbon symposium in Mexico last year, so it's a new issue. And you know, it's been great to talk to Jim Desmond, our county supervisor, about carbon farming. So anyway, it's really important stuff. It's new stuff, but those are kinds of things that students can get involved in. I don't know if you want to address the issue. We're at on carbon farming and pushing the county to do that, or even the state.
So thank you so much for the question. And San Diego Food System Alliance, really, we believe our role is strategic coordination in the region to accelerate food system issues. So what we are doing, there's a lot of issues that we have engaged closely with the local government as well as the state government. But what we are doing is in the next 18 months, starting June, we're really going through a highly participatory visioning process, creating a San Diego Food Vision 2030, where we're going to be strategically engaging with all the cities and state government to really get them on board with improving the food system in the region for the next decade. So that's a very strategic opportunity for us to really educate food system issues and really bring them on board with changing policies, changing the landscape, land use policies, etc. In terms of food waste, we have been engaging with the state on the implementation of the food waste ban in California. making sure that we're not only reducing, but getting that edible food into the community. So not only have we gotten grants from the state to make some of those projects happen, we've been engaging on the policy level with the state to make that happen and providing that technical assistance to the cities so that they can also implement programs themselves. And then with carbon farming, we now have a multi-sector task force in San Diego looking at how do we scale up carbon farming in San Diego. We've inserted carbon farming language in the climate action plan in the county of San Diego. So I'm glad that Jim Desmond is interested, because we really need to get them to release some funding so that they can actually pay farmers for some of these solutions. And there's a lot of champions at the state level right now in carbon farming. Actually, that was included in AB 32 at the state level. So that's good news, but how do we get those resources to flow down to San Diego, because a lot of the state funding doesn't trickle down south. So we want to try to create some resources, financial mechanisms here in San Diego County as well, and we're working hard on that right now.
Well, you also have one of those parts of congressional representation at the federal level. And you've got the Farm Bill. And if that opportunity this last couple of years, that's something to go for, because that's where the money is, bigger than the defense budget.
Right, absolutely, yes. That's where the money is, but that's also where the problems are with the food system, is the Farm Bill. So, yeah.
But you can advocate make change. If I could make change,
Absolutely, yeah.
the Farm Bill, trust me, you could make change.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. Do you want to ask the last question?
Cool. I was curious to Mr. Cronin and I guess Ms. Brown as well, the role of public-private collaboration with using institutions like UCSD as sort of an intermediary for that. Because I know your big thing is you're trying to address your waste stream of the yeast and the barley, and then ideally you'd like to keep that waste stream on site to reuse it to ideally grow more hops and barley and whatnot. And I know there's initiatives right now for more carbon farming to go on. And I know from here at UCSD, we're looking at upscaling our anaerobic digestion because they need biogas to replace all the natural gas, because that's our biggest, carbon issue with Scope 1 and everything. And so if UCSD has all this food waste and they're going after anaerobic digestion, the digesters just right there on Miramar have all this food waste that needs a digester. There's these big initiatives for more carbon farming to go out, and you can carbon farm by making more barley. So it's sort of like what she's talking about. We have all these individual pieces, they're all in their individual silos, so what's the interstitial glue to bring these together from your perspective?
Sure. We're actually in talks with UCSD. So the biogas, the waste stream lowers on the school off season in the summer, and that's when we are brewing the most beer. So it actually matches up perfectly, and they want to keep that waste stream going to feed the bacteria and the yeast in the biogas process. So we are actually talking with UCSD to give them a little extra during the summer instead of giving to the Franconine dairy. So yeah, we're working on it.
And what's the even further downstream for getting, because we're always talking about carbon sustainability, carbon neutrality, but we never talk about nitrogen sustainability, nitrogen closing that loop and all the eutrophication of it going out to the ocean. So what's being done to now use all that nitrogen that you're breaking down on site and actually utilizing it and growing food from it?
Right, a lot of the nitrogen, a lot of the free amino nitrogen in the brewing process will get taken up by the yeast, which right now, all of that goes to the dairy farm. That will then get used again as a fertilizer, where he mixes in the manure and it goes out to the fields. But yeah, you're right. The runoff from that will eventually end up in some sort of water stream and end out in the ocean and lead to green algae blooms or red algae blooms. So that is definitely something to work on. But it does seem to be mostly sequestered in the yeast, and it's just how that yeast is then used later on. Yeast is the main waste stream where there's a lot of ethanol left. So you can, that's why I was talking about ethanol distillation. If you can use that, take the yeast off, create a solid, and that's a fertilizer, but the ethanol from that is used in the medical world or as a biofuel added into gasoline or something. That would be definitely a way of using that waste stream.
Awesome. Thank you for your time.
No problem.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much. Can we give them all a round of applause? If you all have any burning questions left over that you still want to ask our speakers, we'll be having our networking session shortly, so feel free to come up to them at their respective tables in the back after we close out. But thank you all so much. Yay!